very pleased to welcome our next guest to the show, someone who I consider a mentor and then a friend, Peter Loubardias, joining the program today. Mr. Loubardias, thank you very much for taking the time today. How are you?
I am much better than I'm talking to you. It's great to see you, my friend. It's been far too long, and I think it only makes sense that you and I would talk in the noon hour.
Yes. Yeah. It seems like a pretty good time frame for us to be chatting. Hey,
it does. It does.
And with the familiar time slot, let's talk about a familiar subject, and that being the Calgary Flames. Now that we've had a bit of time to kind of let it set, all the emotions out of the way, I would assume at least, and we've got some pretty good hockey under our belts from the playoffs. What do you make now of the last season that we saw from the Calgary Flames?
Well, I think you could probably sum it up, Peter, with a few adjectives, and one of them would be disappointment. There was certainly much more expected. And in terms of summing it up, and we had lots of these conversations as the season went on, I think expectation in many ways is something that I've thought about a lot, and maybe even more since the Flames season ended. And what I mean by that is, were the expectations, considering the division, the types of people that they were facing in the division, were those a little lofty, all things considered? So that's A. But B, there's no way that it's not a major disappointment for that particular hockey team not to find their way into the top four of the North Division. So, underachieved, didn't get it done, certainly didn't prosper under what I talk about a lot, a playoff style setup this year, 56 games, lots of different mini series that, almost emulated a playoff scenario in a sense all year long. And, when it was all said and done, as the new coach came in and pointed out as often as he could, they didn't win enough series against enough other teams. And that's what you had to do in order to make your way into the Final Four, and they didn't do it.
Yeah, and I think one of the big disappointments is that while they played well at the beginning of the season, it's not like Montreal took it from them. Like Montreal, with how they were playing down the stretch, was almost asking one of Calgary or Vancouver, like, here, take it. It is right there for you. Like, just absolutely take it. And they couldn't. And it was so frustrating how long into the season the Flames were still mathematically alive. And it was just, if you would have just taken it, that would have made things so much easier.
It would have. And I thought that late in the year, not surprising that Milan Lucic, of all people, would put everything into the best perspective. But I thought, Peter, that he did. And he talked about a couple of things. It's really hard to make the playoffs, whether it was this season or any other season, if you don't put together a good, true winning streak or real quality stretch of hockey. Mm-hmm. Their longest win streak of the year, my friend, was like that long. Yeah. And on the other side of the coin, they went a stretch at a very important time in the season after the coaching change where they lost 9 of 11. So when you combine those two things, and, we've talked about this a lot over the years, two things that I always stand by. You have to keep your losing ways really tight and compact. Generally, if you start losing more than 3 in a row during the season, more than once or twice, you're probably playing in a bad neighborhood. And then the other part of the season is this. Playoff teams generally don't lose a lot of games to non-playoff teams. That's one I've always stood by. And of course, you can point, directly, and it's fair to a certain extent, but how they handled their business against the Ottawa Senators, and the Flames weren't alone, as you know. The Senators were a pretty darn fine team after that 2-12-1 beginning, where you and I might have stopped more pucks than they were getting, and a young team, finding their way without confidence. Ottawa, in a sense, if you took out the first few weeks, they probably deserved to be a playoff team with how they performed in the last 3 months of the season, but they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, the Flames just really never found their stride. And whether it's in games or in a season, Peter, outside of the first 3 games coming out of the gate, and then remember in January they had that 5-day break. It was
Yeah.
almost like they were chasing uphill the whole year.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, when the games felt more important than they ever have, and the scrutiny. And, you know, the one thing I've talked about a lot too is I've never been a part of a season where every night, one way or another, felt like the be all or the end all, with all
Mm-hmm.
the attention in Canada, in the Canadian markets. And I do. I think outside noise was a huge factor in what happened,
Yeah.
especially for teams that didn't do well. You know,
Yeah.
it was a season that weighed very heavy.
Mm-hmm. So how does this get fixed now? And I understand if there was just a magic, well, just do this, then everyone would do it, and we probably would be making a little bit more than what we're making now. But when you look at this Flames team, where does the next step, I guess, come from?
Well, I think first and foremost, now that, you know, Daryl Sutter is on board, and we expect him to be around for a while, and he's not going anywhere.
Right.
You know, in any situation, in any business, with any team, I think what becomes really, really important is a couple of things. So I would talk about stability. And in the coaching area for this team, they need some stability. They haven't had it.
Right.
You know, there's been way too many changes for anyone's liking, and that, you know, that doesn't speak to good things. So they need some stability there. But probably more importantly, Peter, is from ownership, management, you know, to Daryl and the coaching staff. There's always going to be differences of philosophy and on players and who you like and what you're trying to build. But the best that everybody can now, that I think Daryl is very much a focal piece, you have to be on the same page. So decide, assess, and then, you know, try to feed the machine, if you will, that way. Because, you know, the other thing about, you know, changing coaches a lot is it's no different than a lot of other scenarios. What one coach likes or sees in a player or two, or how they want to play, is going to be different than the next guy, and how he goes about his business. And I think you saw that this year, that it was a major change, not only in how they played, Peter, but just, you know, the type of person and expectation and philosophy of Daryl in comparison to Jeff. So that, even in the middle of the season, becomes a whole new selling process.
Right.
Because if you're a player, in a lot of ways, they are constantly trying to impress a new boss. And that's where I go back to stability. So everybody's got to be on the same page, hopefully assess the same way. And I make no bones about it, I don't think this is a scenario where you have to make necessarily a massive core change, but you need to shake it up.
Yeah.
You absolutely, at this point, you know, and again, it's also how you define the core too, because there's kind of been core pieces that have come in almost underneath the core, part of the core. When you think about a Hanifin, when you think about, you know, Elias Lindholm, when you think about Chris Tanev, potentially, depending on what happens in expansion and what they decide to do with Mark Giordano, Rasmus Anderson. So I really like a lot of that group. But for the same group that's kind of gone along for, you know, 6 or 7 years and hasn't been able to kind of get you over the hump or to a more consistent level of a group, somebody or something has to change. You need to change the feel, I think, of that group.
Yeah. No, and I thought that probably should have happened last offseason, and I understand circumstances being what they are or what they were, and I guess still are. It's difficult to do that when the salary cap goes flat and you weren't expecting it to go flat, and all of these things that have happened in the world since then. It makes it very difficult. But no, I agree. I think that there needs to be some kind of shift because it's just it hasn't worked, right? Like at its peak, it looked great for half of a season and then didn't in the playoffs. And like that, if you want to keep doing that and you want to kind of keep selling a couple of games of playoff tickets, fine. But if you want to build a Stanley Cup champion, I don't, something needs to change. You're right.
Well, the hard part, Peter, as you know, is it's always such a fine line between, what you see as success and what you don't see as success. Yes, I mean, and again, this spring has shown us that when you get in, some interesting things can happen for absolute sure.
Mm-hmm.
However, in saying that, I still think what you're looking to do, like I always think it's a 3-step program. And the 3 steps is, okay, I want to show that I can compete for a playoff spot on a regular basis. That's one. For me, step 2 is I need to be an annual playoff participant. And then step 3 to me is becoming an elite team where there really is never any question. Right. And, and in the salary cap era, and as tight as the league is, and things change, there's injuries, every season is unto itself, which is part of the problem. But the Flames still haven't quite arrived at step number 2. And I think it's fair for people to have thought that they should be there at this point in time. There's still probably, Peter, not enough top to bottom, if you will, talent that is meshing together to be elite. And I guess the overriding story is when you're kind of flirting around that middle all the time of whether you're kind of in or you're not in, or you're in that neighborhood where the Flames frankly have been, for a long time, outside of what really you have to look at today as an epiphany, and that's 4.5 months of 2018, 2019. That's where you've been. So you're not drafting really high more often than not, although they did get Matthew Tkachuk in 2016 in the 6 hole. So it's tough to be in that middle neighborhood in a lot of ways and really progress.
Yeah. And one of the ways you do that is you find some diamonds in the rough. And whatever anyone thinks of him, Johnny Gaudreau has certainly been that from a Calgary Flames perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
But there was some wonder of how he would fit with Daryl Sutter. And I will readily admit, when I was saying on the radio that there needs to be a change to the core, that was my code for saying Johnny Gaudreau needs to be traded. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if he needs to be traded. I don't think he can be the top guy on this team going into next year. If that means you bring in another dude or he's on the way out and a couple other dudes come in, something needs to change up top. But just for Johnny specifically, how do you think he meshed with Daryl Sutter? Because that on paper, that looked like oil and water.
Well, I think it was a work in progress. I think, it's fair to suggest that Johnny played his best hockey in quite some time, certainly on the offensive side, down the stretch with Lindholm and Tkachuk. That was a pretty good combination, I thought. Johnny, for the first time in quite some time, I felt became a dangerous offensive weapon again. And frankly, that was missing for quite some time. It just was, and there's lots of reasons, and, we could get into a lot of them. And, Johnny's I don't know if he's a polarizing guy for many, but he is a polarizing guy in some ways for me. So, I get exactly where you're coming from, and I don't disagree. Now, if you're Calgary, depending on what you decide to do, would you be okay coming back with that trio as a quasi number 1 unit? You probably would. So, if you are going to go down that line, and I think, Peter, in some ways, what choice do you, well, you have choices.
Mhm.
You have lots of choices. But with Daryl as the coach, I'm not sure that there's a real interest, if you will, to tear the whole thing down.
Right.
And I don't think they need to tear the whole thing down, to be frank, because there is some really good in the right age type pieces to build with going forward. But there's really only two ways you can do it. So if you don't have the elite of the elite, which right now I think it's fair to say they don't in comparison to
Mhm.
some teams, not all teams. And that's the other thing about this season. When you're playing against Winnipeg and Toronto and Edmonton all the time, they got a steady dose of the elite, elite, elite.
Right.
That's not going to be necessarily the case when you're back to being in the Pacific Division and playing everybody else. But, in Vegas and with Edmonton, you're still dealing with that in the Pacific. So if that group's going to be number one, well, you've got Mangiapane. I still think there's great progress, even though it was under Daryl Sutter, a lot of hard lessons learned by Dillon Dube, and he'll be a fascinating guy for me personally, come the middle of September when training camp starts. You'd like to think Zeri down the road is going to be a good piece, but Peter, they don't have a lot of high-end elite offensive talent, and they don't have it necessarily in their system or on the way either.
Right.
So if you can't necessarily compete that way, then I better have a 4-line group where I can win matchups in a different way throughout my lineup, until at a certain point. Now, that's not to say, would I put a package together potentially if you really thought Jack Eichel was going to want to come here, be the guy. But again, I say this a lot too. If I got to give you 3 really good pieces to get one, yes, we'd all love to have a number 1 center. But I don't want him to be disgruntled because he now doesn't have people to work with either.
Right.
So, I'm as interested and curious and, fascinated to see where they're going to go, because there's lots of things about this team that I like.
Yeah.
What I don't like is they've yet to show you in hard playoff style situations that they can prosper and get over.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? As this spring has shown, they're not alone.
No, not even alone in this country. Or some would suggest this province even.
Not even in the province.
Yeah. Oh, I know we're talking about the Flames. How much fun have these playoffs been so far? Just a quick detour. It's been amazing, hey?
It's been really good. And I'd be the first to say, not that I haven't missed the fans incredibly, but I'm an odd duck in the sense that, you start a game out here on the lawn to my left, let alone the game that I can see to my right. I don't need a whole lot. But I will say this, when the fans came back in the United States and the buildings started to fill up and the enthusiasm, it has made a massive difference.
Yeah.
And some of the hockey, as you know, has just been, it's been off the charts.
Yeah. No,
the game, even as we tape this on a Thursday, the game last night between Vegas and Colorado, and it's one of those things, I had nothing but great things to say about Minnesota. For me, they're kind of the surprise story in many ways of the 2021 season. I didn't want Minnesota to win because I didn't want to have this series, taken away.
Yeah.
And the way Colorado played in the first 4 periods of that series, I'm like, well, it might not matter for Vegas or anybody else, but, and it still might not, as Mr. Rantanen scores in overtime, but that was a fabulous display. Carolina, Nashville, great series. What we've seen in that Eastern Division, if you will, with those 4 teams has been terrific. And, I guess I shouldn't not mention the first round series that I might have enjoyed the most, which was Tampa, Florida.
Oh, how good was that?
It was, I probably, unfortunately, didn't see as much of it as even I would have liked. I couldn't take my eyes off it.
Yeah.
It had everything. Skill, passion, physicality, a little nonsense. That Florida team, that's a good team.
Yep.
They have a little ways to go, especially on the back end, but that's a good team.
Yeah. Yeah. They're going to be a problem in years to come.
They're a handful, my friend. They're a handful. They're going to be a handful.
Back with the Flames. We talked about Gaudreau. Sean Monahan gets lumped in with that as well, as they have been attached to the hip for forever. I always felt it weird when we would talk about Sean Monahan and talk about how he has improved other aspects of his game. People on the text line would take that to mean, oh, well, he's Patrice Bergeron now. That's what we're saying. It's like, well, no, there's a gap there, but he's at least looking to improve in the areas that he was deficient in before. What did you see from Sean Monahan this year?
Well, I mean, the hard thing is we knew relatively early, because he missed 2 or 3 games at one stretch. And I did. I always felt all year long, and I'm not even saying that it was the same problem, early as it was late, which, turned into an early exit and season-ending hip surgery. And Sean didn't look right to me for the majority of the season. Now, I must say that while a lot of Flames Nation, if you will, he seems to take more heat than anybody.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm a little blind or a little biased. I've always felt that, Sean maybe takes it in the teeth a little harder than I personally think he should, because of some of the things that you mentioned. I think Sean has really tried hard to become a better 200-foot player. Now, in making that transition, has it taken away from what he's always done? Yes. But how do you really assess this year? I've talked to some people who have had hip problems. It's pretty amazing that he even played as long as he did, let alone try to be productive.
Right.
So what I really hope for Sean is be healthy. He's always somewhat been fighting something. But the thing I admire about Sean, and I admire about anybody, frankly, because we all like to do things that come easy to us. It can be really hard to be motivated to get better at things that don't come easy.
Right.
So I do. I think Sean has made some strides in his game. Now, do I think there could come a point in time where Sean could be a trade chip? Yes, potentially I do, depending on how you see your center iceman 1 through 4. But he wasn't healthy. And if you're not healthy, how do I properly assess?
Yeah, it's tough.
It is.
Yeah. A couple other players I want to get your thoughts on. Admittedly, when it was no longer my job to cover the team on a daily basis, I kind of stopped paying attention for a little bit. It was a lot. But I would still kind of you see stuff on Twitter and everything like that. And then one day I see Daryl called out Dillon Dube for needing to grow up a little bit. And that admittedly caught me by surprise, because he didn't take the giant step forward I thought he might this year, but I didn't think he was call him out in the media bad this year. So I guess I want to take your take from watching it every night. What did you see from Dillon Dube this season?
Well, Peter, I still think the sky is the limit for this guy. I've been watching him for a long, long time, going back to when he was 13 and through his junior career, 2 World Juniors. I still think there's a true top 6 forward there.
Yeah.
I really do. But consistency, doing it right on a regular basis away from the puck matters a lot. And there was some really tough love that he had to deal with this year. And did I feel for him at times? I did. But the interesting thing for me, and I don't know how this is going to play out, Dillon Dube can be a really, really important player. So if you're a really, really important player and what I think is a big part of the future, if I have to go through some growing pains to have somebody completely clearly understand what they need to do to be successful, sometimes that tough love is required. But I also think that Dillon has the right makeup to take it, get through it, and prosper from it. There are very few guys on this team. Like, this is not a team loaded with top 6 type people. It just isn't.
Yeah.
Now, and I'm not saying he's there yet, but when this guy is right, he's got it going on. And the other thing about Dillon that I think he has that some other key guys on this team haven't proved to me yet, when it matters the most, this guy's usually pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could say this year in that situation, especially after Darryl took over, that maybe there was a step back. But I do. I think given the right guidance, little maturity, just more experience.
Yeah.
He loves the game too much. He's too blessed, and he has too many things, I think, going for him. I just think, Peter, I'm not saying I know exactly when, because if I did, then you and I could do something different and we could both prosper, and then we wouldn't have to worry about this conversation. And I'd be happy to take you with me. But I do. I think his best days are coming.
Yeah.
I believe in this guy. I really do. And I can't necessarily always say that about everyone, but
right.
I believe in this guy. I really do.
I think something you said earlier about how kind of every season is just its own thing. I think sometimes people think, okay, and I think the Florida Panthers are a good example where it's supposed to just go straight up the whole way, and then you get up to the top and you're a champion. And the Panthers have had a lot of dips on the roller coaster, and it happens with prospects too. Like, we just expect, okay, well, this year you're going to be a 4th liner, then a 3rd liner, now you're a top 6 guy, and you're going to be fantastic. And it doesn't go that way. And so I'm with you. I think if this was a step back, it's probably going to be 2 steps forward very, very soon for this guy. And I think probably a Juuso Välimäki probably fits into the same type of a conversation where he wasn't an all-star shooting to the moon this year. He was fine, but he wasn't what people thought he was going to be. But I think giving up on either of these guys would definitely be a fool's errand.
Well, I mean, I'm with you. I'm with you. I have no idea, to be honest, what the new head coach of this team feels about both those guys.
Yeah.
I know what his expectations are, and I understand, at least in part, what he's looking for. And, in the case of Juuso, what I love about Juuso the most is this guy cares beyond belief. He's a very passionate, emotional, caring guy. And when you're on the wrong side of that equation, sometimes you can find yourself in some tough spots. But remember, in assessing Juuso, how do I put this nicely and not make a lot of people mad? No, I'll just make people mad because I'm good at it sometimes. Why do we have to designate people for places that they need to get to so quickly? Juuso is going to be this Calder guy, and I love him. He's a guy, I think, that could wear a letter for your team down the road at some point. That's how highly I think of him, not only as a player, but as a human.
Yeah.
But remember, he hadn't played hockey really in 2 years. And now you're back in the NHL, and now you're back against this season, high pressure, some of the most skilled people on planet Earth that play the game in your own division.
Right.
And outside of being a young goalie, and I think it's even harder now because of what we really want in young defensemen, being able to defend elite level people is hard. and it takes time.
Yeah.
And in his situation, if I'm going to give you 12 to 14 minutes, I think if you're Daryl needs to see that part first before the other stuff is more okay.
Yeah.
So his skating needs to get stronger. They did a lot of work on that. Just he needs more time. Needs more time, more experience, because the one thing I will say, from the back end, he sees it at a different level than anybody back there, but needs time.
Yeah.
Needs to get just physically stronger, more mature, and better at playing at the National Hockey League level in terms of defending people.
Yeah. And I think we've been so spoiled with some of the young players that have come into this league at 18 years old and just taken off that it's easy to forget there is a trajectory to this. Like, it's not supposed to be you come in, you dominate from day one. There's supposed to be some growth, and you're supposed to grow into this a little bit. And I get that maybe people were too patient at times with Sam Bennett, and that ends up the way it did. But also, like, it doesn't always work out that way either. Like, you're allowed to just progress through this job, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, you are. And I do think there's a big difference between forwards and defense.
Yes.
It's, there are some. We don't see a lot of 18-year-old stalwart defensemen jumping in to the National Hockey League. And even if, you take somebody like Quinn Hughes, for an example, who was 18 plus when, he had his big year, 19, or no, he played in 2 World Juniors. So he was like past that stage. Takes time.
Yeah.
And even he, who exploded out of the gate in year 1, and he's going to be a heck of a player for a long time, don't get me wrong, but defensively, even for him this year, without a partner like Chris Tanev.
Yeah.
Defending elite level people as a young defenseman is hard. It's really, really difficult. I mean, let's stay with the Flames. Rasmus Andersson had no shortage of ups and downs this year either. Expectations go up, started the year kind of running the first power play, put extra pressure on yourself, and he's 24. And he's going to be a really good player, and is a good player.
Yeah.
But further to what you talked about, like, we want everybody to go from step 1 to step 10. Outside of that really small, like 1.5 percentile, it's a process.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not always as easy as my cat just made it look from one step to another.
No, he goes up there very well.
Yes, yeah.
The truth of the matter is, the cat will also come down at some point. And that's what happens. There's a lot of this until you have enough experience and reps and go through good and bad to kind of go, okay, now I'm here. Now I've arrived, and here's who and what I should be at the highest level in this sport.
Yep. Yeah, and it's frustrating because nothing's supposed to take time anymore, but it does. It just takes time.
Well, that's why that's why young kids get messed up. Because in their own minds, they're used to it going from step 1 to step 10.
Yeah. Without
a lot of setbacks. There's setbacks.
Yep. Yeah, and I look at how players are developed now, and it seems like there's a lot of, okay, well, you're just going to go play in the NHL, and if you suck, we'll find someone else who's a whole lot cheaper. Like, it feels like we're missing a step with some of these guys these days.
Well, I think what we're missing, and it's a great point that you bring up, Peter, is this. There's not a lot of middle left.
No.
In the NHL. And with the middle comes experience and reps and time and leadership and all of that. It's if you're not kind of a star now, when you're like 28 or 30, it's hard to stay in the league.
Yeah.
Because of what you talked about, because of the cap, and somebody's younger and cheaper, they're not ready. They're not ready. So you've lost. That's the step. You know, you have elite of the elite. You have really, really talented young people, you know, unlike I've ever seen. You know, I can't, you know, what guys can do now, and it's not just at the NHL level, go, you know, if I go to the rink and watch under 15, what it looks like today in comparison to what it looked like 10 years ago is like a different game.
Right.
And I'm not kidding when I say that. So that all translates. But there's still something to be said about, you know, let's take Toronto and Edmonton for an example. So are Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews two of the most gifted people on planet Earth? Yes. But are they still young? Yes. Are they going through growing pains? Yes. Did either one of those guys, even though one is clearly the most talented player in the world, his team lost to Chicago in the summer and just got swept by the Winnipeg Jets? Well, that's not all on him. I'm not taking away from his ability. I know what his ability is. With a hockey puck, I've never seen a guy faster or potentially more dangerous in all the time I've watched the sport. But there's this other little intangible that I think still matters. Two of them: experience and winning.
Yeah.
Winning. What do you get done when it's the most difficult? That's why, and people, as you know, because you'd see it on the text line, get frustrated with me at times. It's not that I don't care about the regular season, but if you really want to win me over personally,
yeah,
get it done when it matters.
Yes. Yeah.
But
and
back
I think
to my original point is, we expect those guys at 24 and 23 to have all the answers too.
Right.
They have all the talent, but it's more.
Yeah. Yeah. And I understand it. Like I lived there for a couple of years. I understand people in Toronto and their fascination with the Leafs and wanting that team to do well. But people who are giving up on this group, like, you look at the dude, Austin Matthews can barely grow a mustache right now. And we're giving up on this guy. Like, come on. Like those guys are going to be good. But I do think to your point, I think that there is such a thing as learning how to win. And that's why
there is.
I get concerned about and that's why I don't think it worked in Edmonton. When you get okay, well, let's just rebuild and we're going to suck and we're going to get all the first round picks and then we're going to be awesome. And it's like, you have to learn how to win when there's 5 minutes left and you're down by a goal and the other team knows who to focus on. What do you do? Like there are some steps in there and learning how to win. And that seems to be forgotten a lot.
It is. It is. And, you know, I get it. We're in love with numbers today. Mm-hmm. We're in love with the fantasy aspect of sports today. It's not going away. I get it. Even the old fart that I am, I get it. But I still care about winning.
Yeah.
Because I see a lot of disappointment in the fan bases when they don't win.
Yeah.
So, you know, nobody ever necessarily has raved about Patrice Bergeron as the world's greatest player. He seems to be pretty good when it matters, I find.
I would say, yeah.
And I also find, yes, it takes time for some guys to learn how to win. But I also have pointed out there's certain young people at a certain young age, sometimes that just demonstrate when it's on the line, they know how to do it. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, I don't think it's an accident.
No.
Like, you might not like the fact that Brad Marchand has licked the odd face. But from the time this guy was 16, 17 years old in the biggest of situations, regardless of the age group, I see good things happen at important times. Mm-hmm. It's not an accident. It's not an accident.
And that's why I think tournaments like the one that I'll let you get back to here in a moment, why those are so important, because like that is another stage on the international level. And I get we don't take it as seriously here as they do over there. And holy crap, do I need to go watch one of those at some point? But going to watch a world or going to a world hockey championship for a young player and just playing in those meaningful games seems like valuable learning experience to me.
You know, and this year is just different because it's wacky and it's
Right.
COVID and it's Latvia. But under most normal circumstances, but even this year, okay. So Andrew Mangiapane, don't tell me he's not going to be better for this experience.
Right.
You're exposed to different people, different coaching, different players, you know, meaningful, you know, today's game in the quarterfinal against Russia. The more big game type of experience that you have, you know, going over there for him, starting the tournament with the country in the worst shape it's ever been in the event at 0-3. You don't think those guys haven't felt a little heat over there?
Oh, yeah.
Now, I know for the most part, nobody cares. And in a lot of cases this year, even less, and I get why. But when they were 0-3 and had 2 goals, and you're Canada, and all you're hearing is this is going to be the first team never to make the quarterfinals, they had to dig in and find a way. Now, to their credit, they had about 93 things go their way in order for it to happen. You know, and even as we speak, they're given an unbelievably powerful Russian team all they can handle, down 1. But those situations make you better. Yeah. You're around different players. For me, you just can never have enough playoff, bigger game experience. How do we get better at anything?
Right.
Reps.
Yeah.
Reps.
Yeah. That's why I've kept doing this. Me
too.
And yes, I will let you get to that hockey game. Mr. Loubardias, thank you very, very much for all you helped me with at Sportsnet 960 and then doing this today. I cannot express to you how much your support has meant to me. So thank you very much, sir.
Care about you deeply, want nothing but the best for you. This crazy industry, I don't know where it's headed a lot of times, but anytime you pick up the phone, Peter Loubardias will answer. That is a guarantee. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I only used about half my notes today, so I will definitely be. I'll be definitely calling you.
That's hard to believe.
All right, have a good one, sir.
Okay, pal. Be well.
You too.
Take care.